Blimey, we're getting through Series 1, aren't we? The schedule has been all over the place recently, but I'm still on track to complete Series 1 and the Christmas invasion before the turn of the year, which I find incredible considering my real life commitments. And I would like to quickly thank those of you who have watched my videos, or just clicked onto this one for the first time. However many of you have seen from me, thank you. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, please drop a like on this video. Today we embark with Father's Day, Paul Cornell's Series 1 contribution. The episode starts with some voiceover from adult Rose, who establishes the name of her father before we cut to a young Rose and her mother Jackie telling her the story of her father's death. The sequence brilliantly establishes the personal stakes of Rose, so it comes to no surprise that she wants to go to see him afterwards. I find the Doctor cautiously taking her to see him as in character. Usually, such a request would be shut down by the Doctor, but Doctor Who being Doctor Who, the request would be fulfilled. But bringing it back to the long game, you may remember I touched upon the fact that Rose is integrating herself into the Doctor's activities to make them inseparable, so narratively the Doctor submitting himself to her desire is an act of kindness for the human he had quote-unquote adopted. And of course, bringing it back to the Unquiet Dead, Gwyneth touched upon the fact that Rose had been thinking about her father recently, which was a neat Easter egg leading into this episode. And early on in this episode, the Doctor asks what's brought her request up, later concluding that she saw time travel as an opportunity to save her father and nothing else. It's excellent narrative weaving. After the title sequence, we return to the action with the Doctor and Rose sitting in on Peter and Jackie's wedding. It's quite a funny, slightly awkward scene, but then the episode cuts back to Jackie continuing her story to young Rose, talking about how there is a person with him, just before we cut to Rose telling the Doctor that she wants to be that somebody. I find the use of the J-cuts really effective. The director gives us plenty of high shots and cuts in close with some shots to fit the emotion. Coupled with a fantastic score by Gold, I think it's directed and edited superbly. For now. As Rose is saying what is about to happen, we have cutaways to it then happening, and for a children's show, they execute the initial car hit well, and the pacing of the cuts is perfect, though I'm not a fan of the musical sound effect beats used when Rose turns her head. After failing to go to her father, Rose proclaims that she must try again. The key change when she says this is fabulous, and I think it's impeccably acted by Piper.
He can't die on his own. Can I try again?
And then boom, Rose saves her father.
Pretty girl like you. I was going over you.
Stop! Right there.
After an awkward but swiftly paced catch-up, we finally get to see the Doctor's reaction, which is ironically complemented by a fantastic musical sound effect beat to aid the transition. The walk through in Pete's flat is another scene I just love. After the dramatic stare from Eccleston, we then see Pete leading the trio into the flat with the Doctor doing his best to be polite to Pete when he is actually seething mad. Rose recognises this by trying to keep the conversation going by finding things around the room to talk about to boost her father's achievements, in which I interpret to be a plea from her by justifying her actions of saving a good man. The argument between Rose and the Doctor is interesting, especially factoring the context of the future series where the Doctor just willy-nilly saves lives, even from major historical events. Rose consistently makes good points before and after the Doctor drops his absolute bombshell, which is a fab line.
My entire planet died. My whole family. Do you think it never occurred to me to go back and save them?
A trope I find quite terrible in some movies and shows is how characters just argue over each other nonsensically, but this episode doesn't do that and is really well done, with one actor speaking and then another slightly overlap with each other when that person's sentence is coming to an end. It's a great exchange. And, dear Lord, we get to the first prolonged introduction to the antagonist through one or several antagonists going around the area killing random people. It's stated poorly, and when I was watching this with my mother about a year ago, I recall having to remind her that this was something from 2005. It was quite embarrassing watching this scene with a relative. Sticking with negatives for one little tiny moment more, I also find the moments where the dad is a bit pessimistic about the bride as sure, probably a reality for a lot of people, but across the episode we learn nothing that could justify his feelings. Perhaps that's because of the somber nature of the episode, meaning her portrayal is more slightly done as we have to root for her surviving, but having a bit more depth for that could have been good. I think the father simply wasn't written well enough in the episode 2 whilst living, so I must say he's a weak character therefore.
A bit of this, bit of that, straight play.
Right, so we must have heard wrong.
How have we been rickrolled watching television? For God's sake. I too like how time is in flux. Rose pulls out the modern phone to modern music to playing on the radio randomly. To also the first television transmission making several appearances across the episode, and I guess this could also explain away why Jackie doesn't quite remember certain events when recapping the story at the end, and only truly remembers the blonde girl even though she'd been speaking with Rose throughout the episode. So time is in flux. This scene is well done with some POV shots, wide shots, and also subsequently a shot of Rose slightly slumped in her seat, which establishes the weight that she is feeling at that moment. Not only for the close call situation with the car, but also because of the fact she had just called Pete dad. I think this episode lacks the awkward scenes as Rose struggles to comprehend seeing her mother, younger quote unquote. After the scene where a young Mickey witnesses his disappearance and mother disappearing, which is a scene I like by the way as it relies heavily on the direction, we go to Rose who's witnessing her parents reconciling somewhat. It's one last breath of fresh air to bridge the villainous plot into the narrative. Additionally, how Mickey runs from one direction but is dismissed, but then the doctor comes around from the other corner a few short seconds later, reinforcing the risk just as the creatures appear, is terrific, and my god, it gives me goosebumps. I must say that villains have aged quite well in my opinion, especially when you consider the similar Krillitanes in the next series, which were barely seen for obvious reasons. Though, it's established that they can hunt whilst invisible, so wouldn't it be easier for them to pursue the humans in the church whilst invisible rather than making themselves seen? That being said, I can imagine I and many others would be complaining that we're battling nothing if that were to happen essentially, as the audience can't physically see it. Similarly to how some complain about the invisible creature in Vincent and the Doctor, which is actually just a depression metaphor. But even with Vincent, you can still see the villain at times. You have to have that, the physical element, otherwise it would simply fall flat.
Nothing in this universe can harm those things. Time's been damaged and they've come to sterilize the wound.
So, that would mean just Pete, right?
By consuming everything inside.
Considering the context of the show too, why do these creatures not appear again? As a self-contained story though, it works and they're a good menace to the episode. Personally, I think Sean Dingwall portrayed Pete Tyler better in future episodes, but that's probably because he could play himself somewhat as opposed to playing a legacy character, a character from a long time ago. I just felt he was being a bit over the top by often talking with his head down a bit, though equally I don't think it's a negative in the slightest. Yes, his performance wasn't perfect, but that doesn't mean he was bad. In fact, I think he does a lot of the heavy lifting in scenes with Billie Piper later, who herself was good in this episode in fairness. The episode does a lot of great groundwork, so the episode flies by, and what I think is cool that Pete establishes that Rose is her daughter early on, in the perspective of runtime, is over halfway through the episode, yet only the first time they've properly interacted with each other since the threat began. The emotional beats are perfect, and the episode had me cry many times, more times than any other episodes of Doctor Who ever has in fact. Like, I cried during a lot of the companion and Doctor exits, but not at many other times at all, if ever. But this episode hits really close to home, as someone who isn't in contact with their father. It hits perfectly to me, and whilst the pacing does get a bit sloppy in the final 20 minutes, the scenes that are the culprit for the sacrifice good pacing are excellent nonetheless. What I mean specifically is when we get a scene to forward on the plot, which is usually mingled with a bit of intensity, we go back to Rose and Pete just sat down talking, which is frustrating when the transitions are made. One moment I adore, and is the main reason I don't understand the groom's father's pessimism, is the backstory of the couple. The Doctor flat out asks them what the story is, and they tell it. The trio play off each other excellently, and I have no difficulty getting behind the fictional relationship of the couple. And I do like how they gave that humanity back to the father by showing the effect of his loss on the son, which is why I said earlier that he was only poorly written when he was alive. Eccleston's short monologue can be tearing up too. It's well delivered, and Natalie Jones's reaction is subtle, that's fantastic, and really plays on my heartstrings.
Other side!
The Doctor still being so hostile to Rose is disappointing, however it successfully subjects me as a viewer to feel how Rose is feeling too, which I think means the tone of the episode was executed masterfully. After Rose apologises, the pair hug where a get out of jail, or in this case, get out of card is established. After feeling so without hope for so long, the sudden TARDIS key solution being established does feel a bit easy, but quickly we find out that key still needs time, and that the threat isn't over. It gives us hope that all will be well, but not absolute reassurance, which I appreciate. It's not a death in heaven moment where the Doctor can just summon the TARDIS with his key. That is why it's annoying that after such a quick scene with quick music, we generally go straight back to another scenario with Rose and her dad. Seeing the TARDIS start to properly come back is a really feel good moment, and after that we go to the Doctor and Rose talking and Pete in the background and Jackie way off in the front, which first of all is a really well choreographed scene, but it's also a talking scene where the plot actually develops. Established that once they get out, Pete will stay alive. That's when Jackie comes in, which sparks this hilarious reaction from the Doctor.
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
I also love the questions Jackie asks, for example,
She's given my daughter a second-hand name. How many are there? She called them all Rose.
Oh, for God's sake.
Pete then puts young Rose in older Rose's arms. My god, that was a tongue twister, which lets the creatures in somehow. Regardless, the music cutting out as the Doctor offers himself to the sight of the Doctor being devoured to the slow motion of Rose's reaction as the extras behind her run away is simply breathtaking. And after the Doctor's death, this is where the tone of the episode really shifts. We go from the bright brown, vibrant if boring church to scenes where the shadows are encouraged and maximised. It fits the tone of death, namely the aftermath of the Doctor's death and also the death sentence Pete is about to fulfill. How they did this change is brilliant filmmaking. Finally, we get the reconciliation of Jackie and Pete after Jackie and Rose hug after the former acknowledges Rose is her daughter grown up. She's reluctant to lose Pete and the pair snog before Pete turns to Rose, doubling down on her stories being false, and after some terrific heartfelt acting, Rose and Pete hug, and Pete then runs out of the church and into the road. Rose goes to the door of the church, hesitant on going to be beside her dad again, before the utterly magical moment of the Doctor just appearing to her right hand side, encouraging her to go. With the Doctor's return, she is in safe hands with him again, and now she's going to offer her safe hands to her father who's dying. It's just... After Pete dies, Rose stands up and the Doctor is now stood at the other side of her father. The pair hold hands, which incites a musical change as Rose finishes off her voiceover, like how the voiceover started the episode, and the episode wraps up terrifically. So, is it a hit or a miss? Father's Day is a terrific, if imperfect, Doctor Who episode. The writing does the emotional side of things impeccably, and the script is complemented by what is across the board good performances. Almost. The direction is largely excellent with some terrific lighting choices towards the end. The episode gripped me, executed all of the intended emotions perfectly onto me, not just the crown I would like to point out again, and very few pieces of media incite such a roller coaster of emotions on me. Eccleston is perfect, though how his character is written in places is slightly off, and Piper and Sean Dingwall also shine as Rose and Pete respectively. My one and only major gripe with this episode is the pacing, and I honestly can't be happy with giving whichever score I've been contemplating for this episode. A 9 is probably what would be honest of me, but a 10 is what I really think it equally deserves.
You're our last hope.
Red wire, blue wire, black is usually the ground. So much pressure. Pressure.
He'd been talking about it, but I didn't take him seriously.
Annoyingly, my scoreboard doesn't allow me to give it a 9.5, but for now, I give Father's Day a hit and a mathematically accurate rounded up score of a 10 out of 10. It's definitely not the strongest 10 out of 10 I'm ever going to give, and it does just scrape that score, but I'm satisfied enough to give it that score. Thank you guys for watching my review. Please comment your thoughts on the episode and whether you think I was being fair, too harsh, or too lenient on Father's Day. Please like, subscribe, share this video around in group chats encouraging people to do the same, and let's keep this channel growing. See you guys in a bit. I hope you enjoy episode 1 of Flux.
Now I'm a veteran. They didn't know they was fucking around with a specimen. Many men tried to get me, but my adrenaline came in so heavy that I was able to take on 10 of them. Every battle was when I made them irrelevant. The screams loud, the cries of men deafening. I told them all I was sorry and that I'm heaven sent, but if I gotta kill them, then fuck it, I'll go to hell.